Picture this. You're standing before a mountain in Maharashtra. The sun is rising, casting a golden sheen across the basalt cliffs. Birds stir in the trees, and the scent of wet stone hangs in the morning air. From a distance, it looks like just another hill, until you step closer and realize the mountain has been carved open like a fruit. Not brick by brick, not with scaffolding or beams, but chiseled downward from the top, one strike at a time, into a living temple. A temple not built but revealed. Welcome to Kailasa, the jewel of Ellora, a monolithic shrine to Lord Shiva carved from a single rock over 200 years ago, in a time when kingdoms rose and fell by the sword, and knowledge was passed from guru to disciple, not through machines. And yet, what you see before you seems impossible. How did ancient builders remove 400,000 tons of rock without a blueprint, without dynamite, without lasers or cranes? How did they hollow a mountain into precise columns, doorways, staircases, and sculptures, all symmetrical, all perfectly aligned? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, why is there no inscription? No written record, no royal decree, no blueprint left behind? All we have is stone. Stone shaped like memory. Stone shaped like silence. Some say it's more mysterious than the pyramids. Others say it's a miracle in plain sight, ignored because it was carved by Indian hands. But one thing is certain, this is not just a temple, it is a question. And in the next few moments, we'll walk through that question. One step, one chisel mark, one unanswered mystery at a time. Are you ready? Imagine being a stonemason in the 8th century. You have no electricity, no heavy machinery, no architectural blueprints, just a hammer, a chisel, and a mountain. Now imagine someone tells you to carve not a wall, not a corridor, but an entire temple, from the top down. A full 3-dimensional monument complete with staircases, shrines, elephants, towers, and gateways. Not assembled, but excavated. You'd call it madness. Or worse, suicide. But someone, or rather an entire dynasty, did just that. And that story begins with a king. Krishna the Penis, ruler of the Rashtrakuta dynasty. The Rashtrakutas were not the most famous of Indian kings. They didn't build palaces as large as the Mughals or wage wars as grand as the Mauryas. But they left behind something that no empire before or after ever dared to attempt: the Kailasa temple. We know Krishna first ruled from around 756 to 774 CE, and we know that under his leadership, the empire stretched across large swaths of the Deccan. But the temple he left behind is far more legendary than the man himself. In fact, for centuries, even his name was forgotten. Only through inscriptions on copper plates, discovered later, did historians link him to this monument. But here's where things get strange. Local legend doesn't begin with Krishna first at all. It begins with a woman, Queen Manikeshwari. As the story goes, the queen fell gravely ill. Some say during childbirth, others claim it was a mysterious fever. On her deathbed, she made a vow to Lord Shiva. If she survived, she would build a temple unlike any other, and she would not eat until she saw the Shikara, the temple's towering crown, completed. That vow changed everything. The royal architects panicked. A traditional temple could take years, even decades to construct. Foundations, walls, columns, roofing, each layer stacked one atop the other like a puzzle of stone. But the queen had made a spiritual oath, and the king, moved by devotion or desperation, gave a command. The temple must rise, but it must rise from the sky downward. And so began the most unusual architectural project in history. Kailasa was carved from the top down. It sounds impossible, but one look at the temple and you'll see. That's exactly what happened. Unlike traditional temples built in sections, Kailasa was excavated from a cliff. Workers began at the top, carefully chipping away at the mountain, slowly moving downward. Every floor, every sculpture, every chamber was revealed, not built. One wrong strike, one miscalculation, and the entire structure could crack. There was no undo button. But somehow they did it. Somehow an ancient team of builders, with no modern tools, removed over 400,000 tons of rock, carving a temple that's taller than a 10-story building and twice the size of the Parthenon in Athens. And they did it not in a century, but in what some legends claim was less than 18 years. Some versions of the Queen's vow even suggest the spire was revealed in just 7 days. Of course, historians are skeptical. Most suggest it took at least 2 decades. Some say 3. But here's the real mystery. There are no written records. Not a single ancient scroll, royal edict, or craftsman's manual describes how Kailasa was constructed. If this was one of India's greatest architectural achievements, why did no one write about it? Some argue that records were lost in invasions. Others believe they were destroyed deliberately. But some whisper a darker possibility is that the Rashtrakutas themselves were not the original builders, that they inherited a sacred site already ancient, already hollowed, and merely refined and claimed it as their own. We may never know the truth. What we do know is this: whether born from a queen's vow or a king's ambition, the result is a masterpiece of faith and precision. The temple is not just massive, it's filled with delicate carvings, sacred iconography, and vibrant symbolism. At the entrance, 2 life-sized elephants seem to guard the threshold, carved not as statues, but as part of the original rock. Entire walls are filled with stories from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, frozen in stone as if the rock itself remembers. There's a poetic irony in this. A temple made of solid stone, and yet so fluid in form. It's as if the mountain was never carved but persuaded. Some say Krishna I was trying to immortalize his devotion to Shiva. Others claim it was an attempt to outdo the Pallavas of Kanchipuram, whose temples in Mahabalipuram had already gained fame. Still others believe it was a symbolic act, carving Mount Kailash, Shiva's mythical abode, onto earth itself. But whatever the motive, the result is undeniable. A monument that defies explanation, physics, and time. And it all began with a simple vow. A vow not to eat until a spire reached the heavens. Stand before the Kailasa temple and take a moment to breathe. Not just to admire its size, though that alone is overwhelming, but to let your eyes settle into the impossible details. The towering columns, the delicately carved elephants, the staircases that twist in perfect angles, the dancing figures of gods, each chiseled with precision so exact you could trace the folds of their garments or the curve of a fingernail. This is not a ruin, this is not a remnant, it is a statement carved in defiance of everything we believe about what ancient people could or could not do. The Kailasa temple is not just large, it is impossibly complex. Historians estimate that over 400,000 tons of volcanic basalt rock were removed to create it. That number is staggering on paper, but what does it actually mean? Imagine filling 100,000 trucks with stone. Now imagine doing that with chisels, hammers, and manpower, all without cracking the surrounding rock, without collapsing the structure, and without any errors in alignment. No cranes, no steel tools, no GPS, and most shockingly, no written plans have ever been found. The excavation didn't begin from the side, it began from the top, downward. Like sculpting a cathedral by slicing down into a mountain layer by layer, with every mistake irreversible. The vertical excavation method used here is so advanced that modern architects struggle to explain it. Some estimates suggest that even with today's technology, hydraulic drills, 3D scans, laser mapping, it would take decades to replicate what was achieved in a fraction of that time, and even then, it would cost hundreds of crores. So the question lingers, how did they do it? Let's consider what we do know. Ellora wasn't just home to Kailasa. It was part of a complex of 34 caves, a spiritual and architectural hub where Buddhists, Jains, and Hindus carved temples over centuries. But Kailasa stands apart in both size and silence. While other caves are built into the cliff face, Kailasa was carved outward into the mountain's heart. It's not a cave. It's a freestanding temple, hollowed out so meticulously that it appears as though it was placed there, not carved. And then there's the symmetry. Every side of the temple matches the others with an eerie precision. The columns are equidistant. The staircases reflect each other like a mirror. The sculptures on the northern and southern flanks are balanced, not just in size but in narrative sequence. The iconography tells a cohesive story, planned in advance, with no visible corrections. This suggests a master plan, but no such plan has been found. No palm leaf manuscripts, no architectural sketches, nothing. Then there's the absence of debris. Removing 400,000 tons of rock should leave behind mountains of rubble, but that debris is missing. Where was it taken? How was it transported? There are no nearby quarries that show evidence of dumping. Some archaeologists speculate that the stone was carried off to build roads, walls, or forts. But again, there's no record of such reuse. And here's something even more unsettling: no tool marks. In most ancient construction sites, especially in Egypt or Greece, archaeologists find distinct tool impressions: stone chisels, copper hammers, wear patterns, grooves. But at Kailasa, the surfaces are smooth. The cuts are clean. It's almost as if the rock was shaped, not hacked. Some researchers have called the craftsmanship surgical, others inhuman. Naturally, this has invited more unconventional theories. Some suggest that the builders used a lost method of softening stone, possibly through ancient chemical formulas or thermal treatments. Others whisper about vibrational tools, referencing texts from the Samarangana Sutradhara, which describe methods of construction involving sound and resonance. Then there are those who claim that Kailasa is far older than the Rashtrakutas, and that the dynasty merely rediscovered and repurposed it, adding their own touches. But perhaps the most disquieting thought is the one we try to avoid. What if we simply don't know? What if there were knowledge systems, not mystical, not divine, but scientific and practical, that we have completely forgotten? What if somewhere in the folds of Indian history there existed architectural guilds or spiritual orders who passed down this knowledge orally across generations until one day it was gone, not destroyed, not erased, just lost? And what does that say about us? That we remember the names of conquerors but forget the hands that shaped stone into godhood. The modern visitor to Kailasa sees a monument, but those who truly feel it sense something deeper. They walk through a structure that should not exist. A temple carved from the sky downward, where gods emerge from stone and stone speaks in silence. This was not just engineering, it was devotion turned into geometry. It was faith hammered into form. Some say the pyramids are mankind's greatest mystery. Others point to Stonehenge or Machu Picchu. But here in Maharashtra, carved into a basalt hill by anonymous hands, stands a temple more precise, more elaborate, and more unexplained. Yet few outside India even know its name. Perhaps the mystery of Kailasa isn't just in its construction, but in our inability to see what stands before us. Walk through the shadowed halls of Kailasa and you'll feel it. Not just the chill of stone, but something deeper. A presence, a weight, not of ghosts or spirits, but of forgotten brilliance. The kind of genius that doesn't announce itself with glory, but hides in the joints between granite and silence. This chapter isn't just about architecture, it's about memory, sitiwati, and how easily we forget what we should be worshipping. Because here stands one of the greatest human-made wonders on earth. Not in Italy, not in Egypt, not in Greece, but in Maharashtra. And yet, how many of us truly understand what we're looking at? How many textbooks speak of Kailasa the way they speak of the Eiffel Tower or the Great Wall of China? Why is the Kailasa temple not mentioned in the same breath as the pyramids or Machu Picchu? The answer lies not in the temple, but in us. India is a civilization that has built wonders, not just temples but whole philosophies in stone. Entire cities designed with sacred geometry, stepwells that function as cooling chambers, astronomical observatories shaped like instruments. From Harappan drainage to the Konark Sun Temple, from the Ajanta frescoes to Nalanda's ancient libraries, the evidence is everywhere. But the recognition is not. Why? Part of the answer lies in centuries of colonial conditioning. When Indian architecture was described as exotic, ornamental, or even primitive, while European structures were called refined and mathematical. British archaeologists in the 19th century viewed Kailasa not with awe but with skepticism. One official even wrote that the natives could not have made this. He assumed it must have been built by ancient Greeks or Persians, because surely Indians couldn't have done something so perfect. That mindset still echoes today. In our own country, we teach children about Rome and Athens before we teach them about Hampi or Ujjain. We celebrate Da Vinci but forget Madhava of Sangamagrama, who developed calculus centuries before Newton. We praise Greek epics but dismiss the Mahabharata as mere mythology. It's not that we lack pride, it's that we've lost the tools to understand that pride. The Kailasa temple is a perfect example. What would happen if this temple existed in France? What if it were found in Egypt? It would be wrapped in international documentaries. UNESCO would host annual festivals. Foreign dignitaries would walk barefoot through its courtyards under golden light, and journalists would call it the eighth wonder of the world. Instead, Kailasa sits quietly. Visited, yes. Photographed, often, but rarely understood. Because we've forgotten how to read what it's trying to say. The language of ancient Indian architecture is not just visual, it is symbolic, spiritual, and mathematical. It's encoded with ideas. The placement of pillars, the orientation of sanctums, the ratio of height to base. These are not just aesthetic choices. They're part of a vast interconnected system of knowledge, Vastu Shastra, Silpa Shastra, Jyotisha, and Agama traditions. Sciences that viewed the temple not merely as a building, but as a living diagram of the cosmos. The temple wasn't just a place to worship, it was a place to align with the universe, with oneself, with something eternal. But that knowledge was never meant to be locked in books. It was passed through touch, through repetition, through silent teaching, from sculptor to apprentice, from master to disciple, and like all oral traditions, once disrupted, it vanished like breath on glass. When foreign invasions came, whether from the north or across the sea, many temples were desecrated. Statues were broken, manuscripts burned, sacred texts outlawed. But what was truly lost was a mindset. The understanding that beauty and function were once the same, that art and science were never separated, that to carve a temple was not an act of labor, but of enlightenment. Today we look at the Kailasa temple and marvel at its size. But the ancients looked at it and saw Shiva's cosmic dance frozen in stone. That is the level of genius we are talking about. A genius so intuitive, so embedded in spirituality and symbolism that modern engineers can't replicate it. Not because they lack skill, but because they don't share the mindset that created it. And so we stand at a crossroads. Do we continue to view our history through borrowed lenses? Or do we begin to reclaim it? Not with empty slogans, but with understanding, reverence, and study. Because the more you look at Kailasa, the more you realize this isn't just about pride. It's about potential. If a people with no electricity, no computers, and no cranes could do this, what else did they know that we have forgotten? What else lies buried in manuscripts, in symbols, in carvings we walk past without seeing? And more importantly, what can we still learn from them? The genius that carved Kailasa isn't gone. It's just waiting. Beneath our textbooks, behind our assumptions, etched into the walls of temples we've turned into photo spots. Kailasa was never meant to be explained. It was meant to be experienced. And if we choose to remember, truly remember, it might still teach us something. Not just about the past, but about what we're still capable of becoming. There's something unsettling about silence, the kind that lingers not just in quiet halls, but in the gaps of history, where records should be, but aren't, where stories should explain, but instead only deepen the mystery. Kailasa is full of this silence. We know what we see, a temple of staggering scale and symmetry carved downward from a mountain dedicated to Lord Shiva. We know it was claimed by Krishna the Kishan of the Rashtrakuta dynasty. But what we don't know is far greater and far stranger. Because despite its scale, despite its perfection, There are no contemporaneous records describing how it was built. No manuscripts, no temple blueprints, no inscriptions carved into the rock boasting of the king's divine commission, as was common in ancient India. Even the walls of the temple itself are silent about its creators. It's as if the builders finished their work and vanished. This absence has invited theories, some rooted in archaeology, others in whispers. Let's start with the oldest question of all. Was the Rashtrakuta dynasty truly the original builder? Some historians argue no. They believe that Kailasa may have been built over a much older site, perhaps a forgotten temple or a sacred cave used by ascetics thousands of years earlier. Certain architectural elements at the base, worn beyond what a 1-200-year-old structure should show, suggest deeper antiquity. The symmetry might not have been planned from the start, but refined layer by layer across generations. Then there are the inconsistencies. The main temple is flawless, but many of the surrounding structures, caves, and corridors seem unfinished, as if construction stopped suddenly. Some walls are bare. Some carvings appear rushed or abandoned. Was there a war, a disaster? Or had the knowledge itself been lost? The master craftsman gone? The guild dissolved? More curiously, Kailasa has no foundation. It rests on the same bedrock it was carved from. There is no stacking, no bricks, no binding materials. This makes it nearly earthquake-proof. A fact modern architects admire but rarely replicate. How did ancient builders know this? And if they knew, who taught them? This leads to the second theory, the technological theory. Could the builders have possessed knowledge or tools now lost to time? Some speculate about the use of ancient engineering treatises, like the Shilpa Shastras and Vastu texts, which describe not only the dimensions of sacred architecture, but also materials, energy alignments, and even sound-based construction methods. In the Samarangana Sutradhara, attributed to King Bhoja of the 11th century, there are cryptic descriptions of machines, flying vehicles, and building techniques involving vibration and thermal manipulation of stone. Modern readers dismiss these as metaphor. But what if some of it was encoded knowledge, preserved in sacred language, passed only from master to disciple? Some scientists have also pointed to the possibility of geopolymer technology, an early form of stone manipulation. This theory, popular in studies of the Egyptian pyramids, suggests that ancient cultures may have found ways to soften or mold stone using natural chemicals. If that knowledge existed in India, could it explain the smoothness of Kailasa's walls, the lack of hammer marks, the fluidity of its sculptures? Skeptics dismiss these ideas. But then again, the official explanation has no better answers. Which brings us to the third and most tantalizing theory. What if Kailasa is a survivor? A relic from a time before history. A time remembered only in myth. Indian texts speak of yugas, vast epochs in which humanity rises and falls. The Mahabharata, the Puranas, and even Tamil Sangam poetry speak of cities swallowed by oceans, kingdoms in the Himalayas, and ages when gods walked among men. Mount Kailash itself, the spiritual model for this temple, is said to be the abode of Shiva, outside time, outside death. Could Kailasa have been a replica of something older, a monument to a civilization that left no trace but stone? Some theorists connect it to the Indus Valley civilization, whose engineering marvels still baffle archaeologists. Others go further, suggesting links to Lemuria, the fabled sunken continent once believed to connect South India to Madagascar. It's an idea long discredited by geology, but culturally persistent in ancient Tamil and Sanskrit literature. Then there are the hidden chambers rumored, never confirmed. Locals and temple priests have long whispered about underground passages beneath Kailasa, possibly linking to other parts of Ellora or deeper into the earth. Ground-penetrating radar studies have revealed anomalies beneath the surface, but excavation has been blocked, either for preservation or perhaps because the answers lie deeper than we're ready to face. And in all this mystery, one truth remains clear. No one really knows who built Kailasa, how, or why. Maybe that's the point. Maybe Kailasa wasn't meant to tell us everything. Maybe it was carved not to answer questions, but to awaken them, to remind us that history is not a closed book, but a scroll still unfolding, that every stone structure is not just a monument, but a message, one we must learn how to read. And perhaps that is the real reason Kailasa endures. Not because it's mysterious, but because it dares to be. Because in a world obsessed with speed and certainty, here stands a temple that offers only silence and dares you to sit with it. To ask, what if we've forgotten more than we've ever known? To wonder, what else lies buried beneath our feet, just waiting to be remembered? Stone speaks, not in syllables, not in scripts, but in weight, presence, form, and sometimes, more often than we realize, in silence. Walk through the Kailasa temple, and you will feel this silence. Not the kind that comes from quiet, but the kind that comes from absence. From something missing that ought to be there. Something left unsaid. Because for all its grandeur, for all its symmetry, complexity, and impossible design, the Kailasa temple has no inscription explaining its origin. No dedicatory plaque, no royal announcement carved into the walls, no timeline of construction, no names of architects, no signature of the artisans who shaped gods into stone. Not even a date, just a temple, complete, standing, silent. And that silence is deafening. In ancient India, building a temple was never a secret. Rulers recorded everything, from the names of the kings who commissioned the structure to the sculptors, the donors, the rituals performed at consecration. Everything was documented, usually on the temple itself. In fact, many of India's great temples, like Brihadiswarar in Thanjavur or the temples of Khajuraho, contain meticulous inscriptions. They are not just places of worship, they are open books carved in stone. But Kailasa? Blank pages. This raises uncomfortable questions. Was something erased or never written at all? If it was built by Krishna the Pewatt, why didn't his name appear anywhere in the structure? Why didn't he commemorate the achievement? An act of devotion that would have elevated his legacy across centuries. Was it humility? Unlikely. Kings in the 8th century weren't known for modesty. Was it oversight? Impossible. A temple of this scale doesn't just forget its own name. So we must consider something more profound and perhaps more disquieting. What if the silence was intentional? What if the builders of Kailasa didn't want to be remembered? What if they built not for glory but for something else? Something beyond documentation. Something meant to stand outside of history untouched by ego. Some spiritual traditions in India believed that the greatest acts were the ones done without name or credit, nishkama karma, action without attachment. Perhaps the artisans, the yogis, the rulers who oversaw Kailasa's creation believed in this principle so deeply that they chose anonymity over immortality. And yet, the silence persists in strange ways, not just in the lack of names, but in the missing sounds of history. No diaries, no travelogues from the time, no poets describing its unveiling, no visiting kings chronicling its grandeur. It arrives in the historical record already finished, already standing, as if it emerged from the earth fully formed. In a land of storytellers, how did this story go untold? Some suggest that invasions destroyed the records, that temples were desecrated and rewritten by foreign rulers, that manuscripts were burned, libraries razed, and oral traditions silenced by centuries of upheaval. It's a plausible theory. We know that Ellora suffered during the invasions of the Delhi Sultanate and later under colonial suppression, but then why did the structure survive almost perfectly intact while its history vanished? Others believe that the original records were never written because the purpose of the temple was not to be remembered in words, but in vibration. In ancient Hindu cosmology, stone was more than matter. It was memory, it was resonance. Temples were constructed as sonic bodies, where each pillar, chamber, and sanctum aligned with specific frequencies. Mantras were designed to echo through carved channels. Rituals followed cosmic timing. The temple itself was the scripture, not something to read but something to experience. In that view, Kailasa doesn't lack a story. It is the story. Every chisel mark, every silent corridor, every shadow cast by Nandi's gaze. It is all part of an unspoken narrative, a language that only the soul can hear. But we live in a time obsessed with documentation. We demand facts, measurements, names, and dates. We want closure, clarity. So when a temple refuses to speak in our terms, we call it mysterious. We call it myth. Maybe that's the true tragedy, that we are looking for words when we should be listening for meaning. And perhaps that's why the Kailasa temple still unsettles us. Not because we don't understand how it was built, but because we no longer understand why something might be built without needing to explain itself. Think about that. In a world of social media where every action is posted, shared, and celebrated, here stands a temple of immeasurable effort and devotion created by hands who never asked for praise. What kind of civilization does that? What kind of mind? Perhaps the kind that didn't carve for kings or fame, but for something far older and deeper. Perhaps Kailasa is not a monument to history, but a monument to humility. A reminder that not everything needs to be known to be meaningful. That some truths are not shouted, but whispered in stone. And in that whisper, across 12 centuries of silence, one message still echoes. Do not forget who you are. Not because history says so, but because something within you remembers. Not all monuments are answers. Some are questions. Kailasa is one of them. It stands in Ellora unmoved by time, untouched by ego, unburdened by the need to explain itself. It doesn't ask for attention. It doesn't demand your belief. It simply is. A carved paradox, a forgotten memory, a temple that dares to exist outside everything we think we know. And that's what makes it powerful. Because Kailasa isn't just a structure, it's a mirror reflecting back not just ancient stone, but modern silence. It asks us why we remember so little, why we look outside our borders for wonder, while the extraordinary crumbles quietly in our own backyard. How did we forget something so great? How did we let a temple possibly greater than the pyramids in engineering, older than we admit in whispers, fade from the front pages of our own culture? The truth is, Kailasa was never just about stone. It was about vision, precision, devotion, and most of all about possibility. It reminds us that there was once a time when India didn't ask what could be done. It simply did it. With hands that built without machines. With minds that imagined beyond the limits of tools. With hearts that carved not for glory but for God. That possibility still lives if we choose to see it, if we choose to remember. So the next time someone tells you that history lies in textbooks, or that India's greatness began only in the recent past, or that we are a nation of faith but not of knowledge, point them here. To this mountain, to this temple, to this question carved in stone. Because some questions are not meant to be answered, some are meant to awaken,